Hey everyone, ever wondered which of the killers each and every survivor finds the scariest? Let's get into it. Dwight is likely most fearful of the unknown, with the theory being that Unknown is actually wearing the skin of Dwight in its base look, just a Dwight from another universe. This must be horrifying for Dwight to look at this creepy being wearing skin that looks eerily similar to his own. Dwight is already a huge scaredy cat, so Unknown would be terrifying, I'm sure. Meg would fear Legion the most as characters who represent a darker path she could have followed, with her lore centering around her rejecting her darkness and anger and favouring putting her energy into something positive rather than crime. Legion are essentially the opposite of this, and something Meg almost became. They're also of course faster than her, which would surely make her fearful too. Claudette is likely going to be most scared of the characters she's unable to heal against, or at least be altruistic against. Killers who in some way inflict herself and others with incurable things. Plague is the best example of this, inflicting the survivors with an incurable ancient plague that can only be cleansed with special water. Blight would also be scary for her too, seeing the twisted limits of botany. Jake honestly has some quite genuine trauma from his time in the woods surviving wolves, and therefore I would see him finding Dracula scary with his wolf form, or potentially even Houndmaster with her dog. It's these kinds of animals he seems to genuinely fear, where otherwise he's a fairly skilled survivalist. Nia I could see fearing a character like Deathslinger, considering he spent his whole life capturing bounties or criminals, and whilst Nia is a fairly low tier criminal, just doing a bit of graffiti and arson and manslaughter, and okay, she would likely still be worried about being on Slinger's radar, especially once she hears the stories about him. Laurie I could see being fearful of Dredge, with Dredge being one of the only killers who is a step up from the evil incarnate of Myers. Dredge instead being evil incarnate, but also appearing as a formless fog, with a mysterious mass of flesh within. It's just like a scarier Myers. Ace has got to be a killer who somehow disables Ace's ability to rely on his luck. Therefore Hag seems like a logical choice, his chapter counterpart, as she's able to directly affect luck with her hexes, and can likely place bad luck upon him, causing his entire philosophy and approach to life to collapse. Bill is tricky to pick for as a character who fearlessly stood down multiple tanks as his act that got him into the realm. He's gone through wars, zombie apocalypses, and more. Maybe just something completely left field that he's never experienced, like aliens would be the scariest thing to him, so Demogorgon or Xenomorph maybe. Feng I'm going to go for a bit of a meta take, which is that she'd find Nurse the scariest, as she's the most broken character within the trials. She's able to blink through walls, and she's essentially the most unfair character, which would be terrifying to Feng, who sees the trials as a game. How could she beat Nurse? David I think would either fear a killer he would find too physically intimidating, like Jason maybe, or maybe a character who he can't damage at all and would dig into his psyche and pull out the trauma from his past, like Freddy for example. I think this unraveling of his tough persona would be the thing he fears the most. Quentin on a similar note would likely fear Freddy a lot too, due to the extreme trauma he's caused him and how he likely killed Nancy before coming to the realm as well. Maybe he'd find Vecna scarier though, considering Vecna is like Freddy too, and so it'd be a whole new character to break and torment his mind all over again, so it's a daunting prospect. Tapp may just find Pig the scariest due to her carrying on from Jigsaw and posing the same threat as he did. However, he isn't so much scared I think, but maybe more obsessed. I could see him being fearful the most of Pinhead, as he's sort of a step up from Jigsaw, being an interdimensional being who plays similar games, but can also drag you to literal hell. Kate I could see finding Trickster quite horrifying as a sort of dark reflection of herself, where she used music and her reach as a celebrity for good and to spread positivity. Trickster did the complete opposite, abusing his power and taking the screams of his fans for his music. I think she'd find this pretty terrifying, also because there's a good chance she'd get tunneled by him considering he'd likely enjoy her scream. The other option is Clown, who was also a performer and sort of a dark reflection as well, also because he takes fingers, and of course to play guitar you need your fingers. Taking music from Kate would break her surely, where not much else could. Adam I could see being most scared of a character who is more illogical or utilizes magic in some way. Knight may be the scariest for him, partially because he'd remind him of the attitude of his childhood bullies, but also he wields a supernatural power and appears like a ghost with his guards, which would surely freak out his logical mind. Jeff, I'm going with Artist, as Artist is very much a darker reflection of his own story, where he too experiences many of the things that Carmina does, but ultimately pulls through. To be fair, Jeff didn't have the entity haunting his whole life though, which definitely made it more bearable. Jeff too experiences the inner feelings of guilt and torment though, and expresses himself through art, so I think Carmina would be quite haunting for him. Jane I could see fearing Deathslinger the most, as it's a character she actually investigated before the realm. She flew over to Hellshire Penitentiary to investigate the disappearance of multiple survivors, but namely Zarina. It's here where she learnt about Caleb the Deathslinger, and so seeing him for real in the realm, a person from years ago in her mind, would likely be terrifying. And also means all the stories she read about were completely true. Ash wouldn't be scared of much as he's already faced down so many horrifying things throughout his time fighting evil. I could weirdly see him being fairly fearful of Chucky or Tiffany maybe, regaining some trauma from those little Laurie dolls that attacked him early into his show, around when evil returned to his life after so long as well. Honestly, I think most of the actually scary killers he wouldn't bat an eye at, but someone like Chucky would kinda get to him. Also, Chucky knows him, so maybe he'd try and torment him more, I don't know. Nancy is another pretty fearless character who has faced down Vecna and his forces, so I doubt much would get to her. I could see a character who could dig up her guilt for Bob's death could be quite scary for her though, so Freddy maybe would be the most likely case of this, or possibly Unknown too, if it could get a hold of Bob's skin and like come and haunt her or something. Oh god. Robin, as a big movie enjoyer, I could see just finding one of the classic horror movie characters scary to see actually inside the realm, for real, like Myers, Freddy or Bubba. Seeing characters from the screen actually hunting you down would be pretty horrifying. Steve I could see fearing someone fast and unstoppable who he also wouldn't be able to protect others against, like taking body blocks or whatever. So I'm gonna go with Billy, with his chainsaw and fast movement. A character Steve cannot really save others from with his speed and strength in the realm. This I think is his biggest fear as a babysitter. Jonathan I'm going to go with Wraith. Wraith being a character who is more of an onlooker really and gets heavily manipulated by the entity. I could see Jonathan finding this pretty scary considering he too is largely an observer as a photographer, but also unwillingly had a lot of horrible things happen to him. It's a similar dark reflection type of deal. Seeing himself in the Wraith maybe. Yui would likely be most fearful of one of the stalker characters like Myers or Ghostface, as she encounters one in her lore who stalks and attacks her, and it's a defining moment but also incredibly scary for her. This would surely be made only worse with the presence of someone like Myers, who not only creepily stalks but also cannot die. Zarina I could see finding Springtrap scary as a character who has done so much wrong but never really had to face consequences for any of it, with him escaping death even, reminding her of the injustice of her father's death. This is against Zarina's whole philosophy of exposing those who have gotten away with their crimes. With Afton though, there's not really a way to prove much, and even if she did, he's near unkillable and always comes back, haunting her forever. Cheryl I think wouldn't be all too scared directly of another Silent Hill being like Pyramid Head, but does definitely have extreme trauma from her time there, as shown by her lore entry. Therefore I think a character able to act and draw out that trauma as excruciatingly as possible would be the one to make her most fearful, so either Freddy or Vecna I think, considering his powers sort of ape Freddy's. Her lore is centered all around her trauma, so I think this makes sense. Cybil is sort of a tough one, but maybe to go for a bit of a different route, I'd go with a character like Ghostface, a killer who would be scary specifically for a police officer, with him basically being like their worst nightmare, being uncatchable and also mocking you at the same time. James I could see being fearful of the looks he may be, seeing as he's already overcome one unknowable being trying to make him face his guilt, and now there's another in the realm. Oh boy. Lisa I think would simply be Nurse, as Nurse is more than likely inspired by the nurses of Silent Hill, which Lisa would fear becoming, so I think that one's fairly straightforward. Maria is a little tough as she herself is a manifestation of Silent Hill, although I think a simple answer would just be Pyramid Head, as he directly kills her multiple times, already leaving her traumatized more than likely, if she can feel that even. Felix I think would fear Dredge the most, as most of his trauma in his life comes from when his parents are taken or killed by the entity seemingly in front of his very eyes on Dire Island. The Dredge most closely resembles the entity with its similar fog and fleshy claws, and therefore I think it'd provide a similar form of fear for Felix. Élodie could be the same, as she too witnessed her parents' deaths in this way. I could see her fearing twins though possibly, as more of a curveball, considering she actually found out about them and read about their lives. It'd be quite horrifying to actually see them, but more so because they ended up as killers. It makes many of the stories she read about the entity true, but also shows that even these innocent siblings can be twisted to the entity's will. Yun-Jin I could see possibly being fearful of a character like Skull Merchant, seeing as Merchant was a character who directly targeted rich and wealthy CEOs. Yun-Jin likely heard the stories about her through the rich people grapevine. I assume there's something like that. It's also theorized that Merchant and Trickster were friends, which would only make her more fearful, I think. Also possibly fearful as she's one of few killers to outdrip her. Jill doesn't really afraid of anything, and so it's hard to pick for her, especially considering she's faced down and defeated Nemesis, and didn't even find him scary really. She just found him annoying for the most part. I'm gonna go for Dredge, as I feel where Jill can defeat just about any character, there's no way for her to beat Dredge, like she has with everyone else, making her the most fearful of it. Claire likely has a lot of trauma from Raccoon City and from encountering BOWs like Mr. X. I think she could reasonably therefore fear the greater BOW she never got to encounter, like Nemesis and Wesker. Leon is impossible to think of a reasonable answer because bro just roundhouse kicks anything that gets in his way and says some quippy line. I could see him fearing something that represents everything he's faced in one package, so like maybe the Singularity, a biological horror which is also highly intelligent. It would remind him enough of previous enemies but equally pose a greater threat with Hux's higher intelligence. Carlos I think is a simple case of it just being Nemesis, with him having extreme trauma more than likely from Raccoon City and his encounters with Nemesis, where he witnessed firsthand that a huge rocket launcher ultimately did nothing. Chris I think would definitely and simply fear Wesker the most, considering Wesker is at the center of basically all issues Chris faces in his life. Even when he manages to kill him, he has appeared once again in the realm, possibly believing him to be immortal at this point. Chris is also secretly in love with him though, so who knows. Sheva would surely be the same, being Chris's partner throughout RE5 and witnessing the true potential and horrors of Wesker, and being key in taking him down. Seeing him once again in the realm would surely be pretty horrifying, especially knowing that she's now trapped forever with him. Although then again, Wesker like never acknowledges her throughout those games, and so maybe it wouldn't be such a big deal at all. Mikaela I think could be fearful of a few the most. One would be Trapper I think, as Trapper was actually a character she seemingly had nightmares about before coming to the realm, dreaming about being dragged into a basement and placed onto a hook. The other is Unknown, as Unknown was a known folktale within her hometown of Greenville, and a very real one too, and she likely even knew a few people who disappeared because of Unknown's intervention. Therefore, seeing it manifested in the realm would be pretty scary. Jonah, I could see him being scared of Unknown for a few reasons. For one, there's a decent chance he actually knew of Unknown from the CAA's old OSS files, which would have been daunting as even they didn't know what it was. Unknown would further be horrifying to Jonah as he's a man of logic and numbers, and therefore seeing something completely unknowable and incomprehensible would break his logic-driven mind. Yoichi would likely be a simple case of fearing Sadako, considering she's a powerful being who has haunted his whole life and killed both of his parents. Even in his lore, it's perfectly evident he is still terrified of her, but does have the bravery to face her down. Spirit may be another option as well, as she's essentially another Onryo, so maybe her too. Haddie is really tough as she faces down just about every kind of weird enemy in her lore, even vampires, so characters like Dracula wouldn't do much for her even. The one thing she does fear greatly is the trauma from her parents' car crash, and reliving it when the entity shows it to her again in her lore. I could see her fearing a mind manipulation character therefore, like Freddy or Vecna. This is the thing she seems to truly fear. Ada has faced down just about every type of horrifying evil, and so I'm not sure she'd really find any of the cast scary just purely on visuals or presence alone. I could see her being more thematically scared of a character like Pig though. Pig representing facing down your past and the traumas of it, accepting and admitting to the guilt. In the same way I suppose maybe Pyramid Head would work more for an ethereal type of character too. Rebecca I could see simply fearing Nemesis the most as a character who never actually encountered him but would be told the horrifying stories about him by Jill and Carlos, a huge tyrant who specifically hunts down STARS members and is now trapped with them in the same realm. That's a scary prospect, especially with Rebecca being a healing character and Nemi having the T-virus too with his tentacle whip. Vittorio would surely be a killer who is out of the realms of his knowledge due to him being from the same time as Night. There's a cosmetic where he finds headphones and he's like blown away by them, and so I think if he encountered a killer like Singularity say, bro would be absolutely flabbergasted and likely find it terrifying, just not being able to comprehend the existence of like AI and that level of technology. Thalita I could see fearing a character that messes with her mind in some way, as in her lore previously she is deluded by the entity, and it freaks her out a lot. I think a similar case of her mind being messed with would scare her, so Doctor maybe, or possibly someone like Vecna. Renato was slashed on the arm whilst escaping Skull Merchant and seemed pretty traumatized by it, with his life otherwise being quite peaceful up until this point. I would say his fear would carry on into the realm, as Merchant surely targets these siblings to some extent, due to them escaping her previously. Gabriel would definitely fear his chapter counterpart, the Singularity. Hux is already one of the scarier killers in general, to be honest, but then it's made even worse considering all of the trauma Gabriel has from him. Seeing all of his crewmates get killed and literally absorbed into his flesh, it'd be traumatizing. You'd just be like looking at his body and the mixes of flesh and be like, oh my god, that's my boy Joe. That kind of thing. Nicolas Cage would surely find Talbot Grimes the Blight the scariest, a character he likely believed to be fiction, with him embodying him and preparing to play him for a Descend Beyond movie, only to discover in the realm that he's actually real. This would be world-shattering, but also just really horrifying, with the reality of Blight being far more daunting. Ripley has faced down xenomorphs in probably like the hundreds, so I'm not sure any kind of more supernatural or alien killer would scare her much. Maybe something much more grounded would do it, like a simple case of like Bubba with a chainsaw. I know it sounds a bit silly maybe, but she's quite literally out of this world with her encounters, so something more grounded might do it. Rain would have a lot of trauma from her encounter with xenomorphs in the Romulus station, and so I think a xenomorph she hasn't seen yet, the Xeno Queen, would likely be the scariest for her. William Hudson I would say the same for, as a character who knew about the Xeno Queen but never actually faced her. There would be a lot of anticipation. Alan Wake it would surely be a Dredge due to his fear of the darkness after being trapped in the dark place for so long. The Dredge embodies a similar foggy and dark realm within itself. Rose I'm going with Doctor, as apparently she loses control over herself in the first game, and so this similar feeling of loss of control would be felt again with Doctor and his madness. Saga would also be the Doctor due to her having powers and being able to access her mind place. When she loses control over this in the second game, she is terrified, and so Doctor's similar ability to mess with her mind would surely scare her a lot. Sable I'm going to go for a bit of a curveball maybe, but Huntress. As a character that likely knew many of the legends and folklore from around the world, Huntress would be one of the more obscure stories, but one should likely know about nonetheless. Therefore, upon seeing her in the realm, I could see her being pretty scared, knowing about all of her feats. The weirder killers like Unknown after all, she's sort of investigated already, and seen as no big deal, so I think a more grounded character would do it. Aestri and Baermar are tough as two bards who are willingly going to face down Vecna. What on earth would they fear? With this said, I do think it'd likely just be Vecna, considering there's no other reasonable answer, and we do see in their cutscene they are actually fearful of him when they've finally encountered him. I think they weren't so fearful before because they were sort of hyping themselves up, and it was sort of like, you know, one of those hype loops, peer pressure, oh we've got to go fight Vecna now type of deals, so yeah. Happens to everyone, right? Lara Croft apparently has a fear of dogs, and therefore the logical choice seems to just be Houndmaster, a character who is an incredibly well-trained and deadly dog which mauls your arm. In this case too, Lara has no way to fight back either aside pushing the dog away, making it all the more scary. She also encounters an Oni at the end of her first game, so maybe it could be an Oni as well. Trevor Belmont is likely just fearful of Dracula, considering him and his family have been in a brutal blood feud with the guy since like the dawn of time. Maybe more specifically it'd be Dracula's true form, the form where he's releasing his true and full potential. I'd also say the same for Richter Belmont as another member of the Belmont family. Alucard and Soma may have less fear for Dracula considering their close relation to him, and also likely him going slightly easier on them because of this. Maybe a similar bloodsucker who reminds them of him but is even more unhinged would do it for them. Therefore, I'm thinking Kaneki for these two. He's also really powerful, so maybe he'd actually rival their in-law strength or whatever. Tori, I think I'd have to go with Plague, as Plague represents the lengths that even Tori refused to go to. Plague is the true devotee of the entity, who did whatever it took to reach the realm, but also become a killer. Therefore, Tori would likely fear her, knowing how much she likely had to go through to reach her position and please the entity. I think this would be complicated too though, as she'd likely also be a little bit jealous. Arella I think would simply be Doctor, as her friend Emily dies due to electrocution, of what seems to be a replica of Larry's as well. Inspired by the stories Arella heard of Doctor via Sable and her podcast, the replica being built inside of their haunted house, and malfunctioning. Also because Doctor is a quote-unquote medical professional on the complete opposite end of morality to Arella, so maybe that'd make it scarier as well. Rick is quite hardened from years of surviving a literal apocalypse, and so I'm not sure he'd be fearful of many of the more human characters. I could see someone like Pinhead being scariest for Rick, Pinhead being a character who binds you then takes you away. If Rick would be scared of anything, it's his fear of his family not knowing what happened to him and never reaching them again, so this could be scary. Daryl is another character who doesn't afraid of anything, and therefore I think something more thematic like Clown could be scary to Daryl, reminding him of the destructive tendencies of Merle, but also his drug use and abuse abuse that he caused him. Darrow would likely see these things again in Clown, I believe. Michonne I could see fearing Oni as a character who wields the same weapon as her, yet is someone actually from that time and a true samurai. I could see Oni seeing her as a false samurai and a pretender, leading him to target her with his rage, which has got to be scary for literally anyone, even Michonne. Maggie I think would be most fearful of Doctor, as she'd be reminded of Negan, a character who is also pretty crazy and of course wields a bat. I think the insane laughter and bat combination would surely pull up some memories of Glenn's death. Trickster could possibly do the same, as he's a bit of a performer like Negan too. I'm assuming this Maggie is from around the time he died, as that's what her outfit looks like. V I could see fearing Krasu as a creature of Thai folklore come to life. It'd be all the more relevant and terrifying for her, as she would know the stories surely. The other character could be Clown for similar reasons to Kate, with Clown being a dark reflection of her, but also because he would slow her down, which is something she hates with her fast beats and rhythm. Dustin would surely be the most fearful of Vecna, the real Vecna, as he would be one of few survivors who would actually fully understand the power of the character and how screwed they are when going against him. With all of his D&D knowledge, he'd surely be terrified. Eddie I would probably go for the same, seeing as he too was a huge D&D nerd, and so would also understand the true power of Vecna. I could also see him fearing Dracula as an equally powerful character, but also due to the reminder of his literal death with the bats, reliving the trauma each time he sees them, as Eddie was seemingly taken to the realm at the point of his death, making it quite traumatizing. 11 I think would simply find Henry the scariest, specifically in his Henry form, as it's basically the source of like 90% of her trauma, with the lab but also how he manipulated her. Therefore I think seeing him in this way would be truly terrifying for her and make her relive those memories. Tae-young I think would simply be most fearful of his own creation, knowing the horror that he's made by replicating but also enhancing the Trickster, essentially. Mina would surely be the killer he fears the most, also because Mina directly speaks to Tae-young and likely targets him too. Shane I think would likely find Dredge the scariest, with his cousin Derek getting into trouble due to the entity's fog, which is very reminiscent of Dredge's own body. This fog haunting Shane for years to come, as he's unable to prove the entity's presence to save Derek from a life sentence, leading him to investigate it. Dredge is the most similar to the entity's fog and appearance, and so he would find it the scariest I think. Alright, that's gonna do it. Let me know your picks too down below. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.